Welcome back to our next and second last little reflection on the story of the early church in the Acts of the Apostles. I wanted to look at sort of the second half, the end, you might say, of Paul's missionary journeys, beginning chapter 18, verse 24, and going right through to chapter 26, verse 32. He had two journeys, one you remember to Asia Minor, and then the other one through Asia Minor to Greece. He's back in Antioch, and now he starts what you might call his third journey. He goes back through Asia Minor and ultimately ends up in Ephesus. And that becomes a base for his mission for about 2 years. It's believed not only that he stayed there, but that he also wrote a number of his letters. We're not quite sure, which gives me a chance just to refer to the fact that he wasn't just a missionary preaching or building up communities. He also was a writer of letters to many of the communities that he had visited, or even in some cases was going to visit. So you'll know about the letter to the Corinthians, the two letters he wrote to the church in Corinth, the letter to the Ephesians, the church in Ephesus, where he is at the present time in our story, the two letters to the church in Thessalonica, we call it the letter to the Thessalonians, to the church in Colossae, the Colossians, to the letter church in Philippi, where he had visited, the Philippians, and of course the letter to the Romans, whom he would visit only at the end of his journey. So Paul was a prolific centre for missionary activity in Greece and in Asia Minor, particularly through the many letters that he wrote to sort out problems and sort out difficulties and answer questions that were coming to him from the local churches that he had set up. Now, he is there, and eventually, as happens and so often in Paul's case, he ends up having conflict. First of all, after a number of months, he had conflict with the Jews, and he had to move into a separate house. And eventually he ends up having another conflict in Ephesus with the silversmiths, who were used to making lots of money from people who would come to the temple of great Diana, their great goddess. And of course they saw their business being damaged. So Christianity has very often found objections, not for theological reasons, but for quite mercenary reasons. So at the end, there's a bit of a riot, a silversmiths riot in Ephesus, and Paul eventually is rescued from that. And then he decides to head back to Jerusalem. And in many ways, this journey back to Jerusalem, visiting Greece and then coming back via Ephesus again, is the beginning of the end. He knows he's moving towards his own martyrdom. So he visits Greece. He comes back via Ephesus and meets the leaders of the church of Ephesus in a place called Miletus, and gives a substantial story to justify his mission, who he was, how he was called, what he tried to do, and the problems, the threats, the dangers that he saw lying ahead for this young church. He was very realistic as well as being idealistic about his mission. And eventually he arrives in Jerusalem. But he discovers once he gets to Jerusalem that he's a marked man. He is known as the apostle to the Gentiles. He's accused of being the one who tells Jews all around the world, it's believed, not to obey the law, not to have your children circumcised anymore. So he's arrested in the temple area in Jerusalem, where he's trying to be conciliatory towards the Jewish population. He's arrested for being anti-Jewish. There's a riot. The Roman authorities have to rescue him. He's tried by the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, but of course he's very cute. He plays off one group, the Pharisees, against the Sadducees, and that whole thing collapses. Then because that trial collapsed, there's an assassination planned, and it's overheard about, and he has to escape. So he's taken by the Roman authorities then up to Caesarea, which is about 120 kilometres, 75 miles to the north of Jerusalem, on the coast. And there he's kept for his own safety. He's questioned by the Roman governor Felix. He can't find anything against him, and yet the Jewish authorities want him to be killed. He's held in custody, we're told, for about 2 years. Then there's a new governor called Festus comes in, and eventually, because the whole thing is going nowhere, Paul actually appeals, because he's a Roman citizen, which not everybody was. He was a citizen of Rome, couldn't be flogged, had certain rights. As a Roman citizen, he appealed to have his case heard before the August Emperor, before Caesar in Rome. So eventually, at the end of a long struggle, going over a couple of years now, where the Jewish authorities want rid of him, where the Roman authorities aren't quite sure what to do with him, eventually the decision is taken that he will go by sea to Rome. And the final two chapters that we'll look at next week are the exciting journey to Rome, being shipwrecked on Malta, eventually arriving round about Naples, and then ultimately coming to Rome. And the last number of verses is about his time that he spends in Rome. And we know nothing about his death at that stage. So perhaps we could try and reflect back in preparation for next week on what sense do you get by reading these last two chapters of the Acts of the Apostles? What is the next unwritten chapter of the story that lies ahead after Paul is no longer on the scene? Enjoy your reading, your praying and your meditating. God bless your journeying with St. Paul, with the Acts of the Apostles, and under the power of the Holy Spirit.